Hi everyone, today we're going to be creating this super easy expressive flower watercolour piece. Anyone can try it. I'd recommend it for anyone from beginner to advanced. It's a super easy tutorial, so let's get straight to it. To start with, I recommend pre-mixing all of the colours we'll be using today. This just makes things a lot easier as they will already be there ready to use as we go along. So to start with, I'm going to mix some lemon yellow and cadmium yellow together, and in the next palette some crimson. I've watered both of these colours down using a lot of water as these are going to be used for the background. I then mixed some burnt umber, kept this really dark because it's going to be used in the middle of the flowers, and then again I put some lemon yellow down with some cadmium yellow and then some crimson. I added less water into these two as they're going to be used for the petals and I wanted them to be darker than the background. I mixed some burnt sienna and burnt umber as well. This created a nice orange tone to use for the middle of the flowers, and also some sap green. I then trialled all these colours on some scrap watercolour paper. I wanted my background colours to be extremely light and the colours for the petals to be just a little bit darker but still quite pastel-y, so finding that balance is really important, so I definitely recommend doing this before we get started on the actual painting. Now that we have all the colours, we can get started on the actual painting. So to begin with, I use the wet in wet method. By this I mean I put a layer of water down and then added my colours in afterwards. So I used the two light colours, the crimson and the yellow, and put this down onto the paper. I only used a little bit of this and then just wait for that to dry and we can get started on creating a pencil outline of the flowers, which I then did using a really light pressure. I did 5 flowers in total, but feel free to draw out as many as you like. Once you're happy with your pencil outline, you can then go in and add the middle of the flowers. I've done so using the burnt sienna mixed with the burnt umber to create that really nice orange brown centre. And once we've finished that, you just got to wait for that to dry and then we can start adding in the petals. For this first flower, as you can see, I've used the crimson, used the darker one from the palette, and again using the wet in wet method, I've put in each individual petal using a little bit of water and then dotted in that crimson. And then afterwards I've dotted in some of that yellow and just watched them merge together. Before you add down the colour for this, please make sure that the pencil outline is really as light as it possibly can be, otherwise once the paint dries you'll be able to see that still. And once you've done that, you can add down all of this lovely colour, watch the colours blend together and merge to create this lovely petalled pastel effect. Once you're all happy with the first flower, you can then move on to the second. I'm going to do the exact same process. The only difference this time is I'll be using the yellow before the crimson. I'd recommend using the colour you want the most of down first. So in this case, the yellow, and then we'll be dotting the crimson into that and watching these bleed into one another. Also, if you happen to use a bit too much water beforehand, feel free to dry your paintbrush at any time and pull out some of that water, and that will allow for a nice easy finish without there being too much water collecting into one particular area. As you're completing this process, I'd recommend trying really hard not to bleed the petals into one another, as they will merge and you won't be able to see that distinctive petal outline for each one. So I'd recommend trying not to let them touch one another. If the petals do end up bleeding into one another, again you can pull this colour out using a dry paintbrush or some kitchen roll, toilet roll, something like that. I just recommend trying not to do that the best you can. For the rest of the flowers, we're going to repeat the exact same process. going to go into all of the petals using either the crimson or the yellow, and then working our way round and dotting in some of that colour, the opposite colour, afterwards. For a more in-depth look at this tutorial, please feel free to check out my Patreon. I've linked it below in the description, where you can take a look at all the real-time tutorials I have created, including a variety of beginners tutorials using watercolour. After all of the flowers have dried, you can then go in with the sap green and add in the stems. It's important to wait for the petals to dry, as you don't want the green then bleeding into the flowers. I also decided to wait before adding in the last flower in the middle, as it overlapped all the other petals, and I wanted to make sure they were all dry before putting in the main flower. Once I was completely sure all the petals were dry, I then added in the petals for the final flower. This overlapped with the flower next to it on the right, and I just went over it as normal. I wasn't concerned with how they were overlapping, and this creates a really nice translucent flow of colour. Once we've added in the final petals, wait for this to dry, and then you can add in the final stems, and that is the flowers, the petals essentially finished. You can go in and tidy them up as you please. But after we've finished that, I'm going to go in with the dark brown into the middle of the petals and just dot some of this paint really delicately into the middle. I'd recommend using the smallest paintbrush you have available to you to complete this part of the painting, as you want to get the dots as small as possible, so the smaller the brush, the easier this will be to do. And finally, once everything has dried, I'm going to go in with the darker yellow and crimson and put in some paint splatters, and that is all that we need to do to finish this piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed painting along with me, recreating this super easy watercolour flower piece. Thank you so much for watching.